Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another podcast. We're right in the middle of the hurricane. So lucky right now that it bypassed Texas for the moment. We're not getting any rain over here and where I'm at in Cyprus. And I don't think, Massiel, you've seen any rain either?
Nope, it's been clear and sunshine.
Unfortunately, though, Louisiana did get hit, so we're really praying for those that are in Louisiana and on that path. But we are happy that at least here in Texas, we didn't take the beating that we thought we might. But it is hurricane season, so you never know what might happen.
Yeah.
I'd also want to highlight the fact that we've gotten a lot of questions about PISA, and we're super happy about that as they are our main sponsor. And a few things I just want to clear up for those that are asking what PISA really is. So PISA helps support oilfield service companies. They're the unified voice for the oilfield service sector and equipment organizations. They advocate for us. They provide webinars and resources for those who might not have them internally, including some of those resources is in diversity and inclusion, but also they were front runners when COVID happened on how to come as a unified front as a service company and provide the support for your employees and for the operators that might be working for on the front grounds during COVID. So they've been very supportive in that, and they support more than 600,000 jobs in our sector. So if you are working for a service company or even an operator, I highly recommend just looking into them and following them.
Totally. And thank you for joining today's episode. We are interviewing Karen Olson. She's currently a senior completions advisor at Well Data Labs, and she holds a petroleum engineering degree from LSU and a master's degree from Texas A&M. She started her career as a frac engineer for the Western Company of North America, and from there, she worked at Mobil, then BP, and spent a lot of her time working at Deepwater, Gulf of Mexico, onshore unconventionals and conventionals, and in the North Sea. She is a completion reservoir engineer with more than 36 years of experience. Now, that is a lot of experience. I think she has the most experience so far that we've had somebody on the podcast. She previously was the director of the technologies for Southwestern Energy, and she has also been with SPE for more than 36 years. So very committed to our industry, committed to helping and to sharing the knowledge across all boards. Last year in 2019, she won the SPE award for the inaugural Sustainability and Stewardship in the Oil and Gas Industry. She is amazing, and you will get to hear a lot more of her story. And also, something to finish off her already amazing bio is she has been leading the Women in Hydraulic Fracturing webinars since COVID started, and it was a way for them to give back to the community during these hard times. So Karen, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your amazing oilfield story.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, ladies, for inviting me. I'm really excited, and it's great that y'all are doing these podcasts and trying to get these stories out there. So yeah, thanks for the invitation. And I'm a little shy, believe it or not, when it comes to talking about myself, but I do like to give back to the industry. So
we definitely see that with just the stuff that you've done for SPE and hydraulic fracturing. So we're very happy to have you on. So to start off, why don't you just tell us a little bit about your childhood, where you grew up, and what life was like growing up as Karen?
Well, most people don't know this, but I'm actually Canadian. So my whole family we're all from Canada originally. My father was in the trucking industry. He was a financial analyst with Mack Trucks, and he got transferred from Canada, Ontario, Canada, to Dallas. So my childhood was primarily in Dallas, Texas. I have an older brother and older sister. My mom's a nurse, and my dad was a financial analyst. When I was 11, we moved to Jackson, Mississippi, where I went to junior high and high school. And from there, it was, where was I going to go to college? I was really good in math. I really had some speech problems growing up. And so I never thought I was very good in English, even though I pushed myself to this day to write technical papers and such. So back in the day, I just thought I'm really good at math, so I'll be a math major. And luckily for me, my dad just made the comment to me. He said, well, just just make sure you major in something that supports your spending habits, which was great advice, because typically, when you're a teenager, you assume the life you're living with your parents is going to be the life that you're going to have as a grown-up. And for me, the light bulb sort of went off, and I was like, oh, well, maybe I should look at what I can do with the math degree. And all at the time I could think of was teaching. And so I decided to go into an engineering degree. And back in the day, the oil business was booming. It was, I graduated, I don't even know if I should say, but I graduated from high school in 1979. And it was when the, oil industry was just growing by leaps and bounds. And so I thought that I wanted to get into it, which is interesting because we've gone through the same cycle again. It seems to be on a 30-year cycle trend, these big, upticks, and then we seem to fall off, which is unfortunate for the industry that we have these big cycles, but yeah.
So interesting.
I
So
went to
you went
LSU.
into going into petroleum engineering with not really much of an oil field background. Your parents and family were not part of it. You came from Ontario, which obviously there's no oil and gas.
Right.
That must have been difficult to try to choose petroleum engineering out of all the engineerings, where I'm assuming there wasn't also a lot of women in it. You didn't know anything about the industry. It was probably even more dark back then. So that kudos to you, and now 36 years plus in the industry. When you graduated, you said you started working for an oil and gas service company. Can you tell us a little about what that experience was like, your first day on the job, and were you the only girl out there?
Well, I was. So I got my first job with the Western Company of North America. It was Eddie Childs was the CEO at the time. He was a character. He always had slogans like, if you don't have an oil well, get one. And I'm mad too. He had bumper stickers. I mean, it was a really good company. But myself and there was one other lady, it was Judy Trimble. We were the first women that Western had hired to be engineers. And she was working in Kilgore, and I was working in Bryan College Station district. And it was hard. We were put in a training program where you had to learn how to drive trucks to location. You were expected to rig up iron, cut sacks, which they always seemed to like watching me cut the gel, the gel sacks. Back then, there was no friction reducers, liquid, add a gallon per 1,000. No, it was cut, you had to cut 14, 15-pound sacks for every frac tank out on location. And I always seemed to be the ones cutting the sacks. And I was actually in really good shape back then, I must say, because of it. But, there weren't any bathrooms on location. And you were there from, you'd have yard time at 2 a.m, and you would rig up every location. Back then the wells were vertical, and it was a single frac job. And so you would drive a location, rig up, be ready by 8 a.m. Company man show up, you pump the job, rig back down, go back to the yard, wash the truck, put it up, and then head home, eat, sleep, and then you woken up again at around 1 or 2 in the morning. So it was busy times. Even though it was sort of in that downturn, this was in the 84, 85 time period. So oil prices were slowly dropping, and people were being laid off. So right when I started the industry, there was people being laid off. And so when I showed up, for example, we had 40 people working in the lab doing water testing, cement testing. And by the time I left at the end of 85, I was the last person working in the lab. So it was just me at that point. But it could be tough. It was, when you start in the industry and you're 22 years old and you're the only woman out on location, and you come to realize that there's some of the guys, they're there to help you. And then there's some that just didn't think I should be there. And it didn't matter how hard I worked, how much I rigged up or cut gel sacks. They just didn't think women should be in the oil field. And so that was sort of hard to take because I wasn't used to that. I was used to just, coming from college and having lots of friends and, not this experience of why are you here? You shouldn't be here in this industry. So that was difficult. I think that's why I went back to graduate school. I I dealt with it for 2 years. And, sometimes I would get stuff put in my locker. There'd be the lockers with the slits in it, and they would put dirty pictures or, you know, sexual stuff in the locker. And I'd ask my Dad, what do I do? Well, how do I deal with this? And he said, well, just keep it. And then when you've had enough, just go dump it on your boss's desk and say, what are you going to do about this? I can't take it anymore. And so I did. It was like a brown paper sack. And one day I went and dumped it on my boss's desk, and I said, look, I've had it. Can you do something to stop this? And he just told me, men would be boys. And he just sort of blew it off. And so at that point I was like, okay, I want to stay in the oil industry, but I don't want to keep doing this and dealing with this. And so that's when I went to graduate school. And, luckily I was right there by Texas A&M. I got my A&M cup to this day. And I met Dr. Lee, who's still a professor at A&M, God bless him. And he told me that I could come to graduate school and I could just work at their consulting firm, which was Holdridge and Associates. And that was probably a pivotal moment in my career right there.
So when you went to school originally, you got your petroleum engineering degree, right?
Right.
And
yeah.
When you were doing that, did you ever get questions during that time of, hey, there's not very many women that work in this industry, because that was back in, you were saying the 80s. So right. I'm sure you were probably one of few that were, embarking on a petroleum engineering degree specifically. Did you ever have any concerns at the beginning?
Not really. I guess I sort of had the attitude that I could do anything. I grew up, my parents telling me I could do anything I wanted to do. I just needed to put my mind to it. And so they didn't really distinguish the fact that, I was a girl and my brother was a boy or anything like that. We were just, we could do whatever we put our minds to. And I did have a professor at LSU tell me that he didn't think women should be in the oil field. And quite honestly, it just sort of pissed me off. And I was like, well, I'll prove you wrong. And so I just worked extra hard and made an A in his class to prove that, hey, women are just as smart as men.
I agree.
And quite honestly, the well does not know if it's a man or a woman.
No, valid point.
So.
Totally. What kind of advice would you give to young, fresh grads who, finished engineering and they get a field job? Like you mentioned, being in the field is obviously very difficult. There's a lot of hours. You deal with different things versus going to an operator. What advice do you have for, those people going into it and may want to quit because it is a difficult job?
It is. Well, I would say field experience is very important, especially for women. You're always doubted as a woman that you don't really understand what's going on out in the field. So to get firsthand field experience is, I think, critical. You need to stay professional when you're out in the field. You're working with field personnel. They may not be perfectly professional, but as an engineer, you need to stay professional. You need to respect. This is another key one. You need to respect the field people. They know so much. They may not have a degree, but they understand what's going on and they can teach you so much. And then what I tell the young engineers is just think about if you want to have an oil company one day yourself, you need to understand everything. So when you're out in the field, try to understand everything. How is everything hooked up? How does everything operate? Everything. And the only way you're going to really understand all that is working with the field personnel, talking to them on a regular basis, finding those ones that have lots of experience and becoming their friends so that you can have that conversation. If you need to know somebody or something, you could just pick up the phone and call a field guy and say, hey, can you help me with this, or can you explain this to me? So I mean, even to this day, I can say, yes, I have over 30 years of experience, but, sometimes people question, whether I have operational experience. And it's like, I've been going out to the field my whole career.
Yeah. No, I strongly agree with everything that you said. And we have heard that, especially from a lot of our guests, about one of the main things being be in the field and be present in the field, learn and also respect those, degree or not, it doesn't matter. Everybody's earned a right to be there.
Yeah.
The one thing I wanted to ask you about, last time we talked, you mentioned that you wrote a paper that got you a $5 million grant. And that is what got you a job offer at Mobile. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so well, it was actually my master's degree thesis. So when I was working at Holditch and Associates, they would hire graduate students, and I could work on my thesis while I was working at Holditch. It was sort of a dual type of job. And so what I did was I evaluated a DOE study that had taken place back in the 70s. And they were trying to determine the optimum completion for the Devonian Shale up in the Appalachian Basin.
Mm.
And so I went back and I reevaluated every test they did, all the diagnostics they did, and I identified the gaps. You know, some of for example, they would try to determine what the fracture height was in the Devonian when they were cracking it. But then some of the tests was ambiguous and didn't give them very good answers. And because of that, they couldn't really come up with a clear recommendation on what was the optimum completion for this horizon. And so then I wrote a proposal saying, okay, here's what's been done in the past. Here's the gaps that we still don't understand, and here's what we should do to go forward. And then Holditch and Associates put it as a proposal to, back at the time, it was the GRI, or the Gas Research Institute. And and Holditch received the $5 million research grant. And I say I received my diploma and a job offer from Mobile, which I was very grateful for. And they received this research grant. And interesting enough, and I didn't realize it till maybe just a couple of years ago, a good friend of mine, Joe Franz, Holditch hired Joe to do that research and to oversee that work. And you know, when I was, got to know Joe, he had been working for Range Resources as the technology manager. And when we got to talking, it was like, oh wow, you did that research for Holditch. I actually wrote that proposal. So it just shows the oil field is a small world.
It is.
Yes.
So you got the job offer with Mobile, you moved to West Texas. There was also a downturn, I believe, right when you moved over there. So the housing market there was a lot of foreclosures. You kind of mentioned it was a ghost town. And then a few years into it, you got pregnant for the first time, and you were talking to us about how you were trying to be a mom while still going out to the field. And then in the trailer, at the back of the trailer in a room, you would, go and pump because you had to have milk for your daughter, which you called golden milk or something like that. And I thought it was so cool. So can you talk to us a little bit about that and kind of that experience of trying to juggle motherhood, but still, keep your career number one?
Yeah, so there was actually quite a few women at Mobile at the time that were having babies, and that made it easier. But when you're working out in the field, like I was working as a completion engineer, back then we would go out to location whenever we were fracking a well. And I had just gone back to work. My daughter was maybe 3 months old and I was still nursing her. And so I had this, this big breast pump that you could rent from the hospital. And I'd just take it out to location. And I guess part of my attitude is I don't really worry too much what people think. I just try to do what's right. And I was trying to do what was right for my child, plus do my job at the same time. And so I'd go out to location and I'd have a box and it'd have the breast pump in it and it'd have logs and procedures and my hard hat. And I'd pull up, there'd be like a central drilling trailer. And I could still remember I pulled up and one of the drilling well site supervisors came out, offered help. Hey, Karen, you need some help? And I was like, thanks, Joe. Will you grab the box in the back seat? And so I was grabbing my boots and everything, and he grabs the box and he sort of puts it on his beer belly and he's looking down in it. And he goes, Karen, what's this big blue thing in here? Oh, that's just my breast pump. Like, to me, it's no big deal, right? And his arms weren't long enough to get that box away from him. But it was like,
Ew.
and I said, just put it in the back room, because it was just like a trailer and it had bedrooms that they didn't really use, and then a kitchen area with a table that they would all sit around and drink their coffee. And so I just put it in one of the back rooms, and I'd go to location, and then when I needed to, I'd just go to the drilling trailer and go, and I'd lock the door and take care of business. And I'd come out with 2 little bottles of gold, as I said it, and I'd put it in the refrigerator. And of course, there's all these guys sitting around the table, and I would just say, hey, this is gold. Please don't put this in your coffee. And then I'd go back to location, and I said, I'll be back later. And then later I'd go swing back by, and I'd have a cooler bag, and I'd throw it in the cooler bag and take it home. And so I was just sort of keeping up. But my mom was a nurse in labor and delivery, and so she was really, a strong believer in, breastfeeding. And that was sort of my special time with my child, especially in the middle of the night. So yeah, so I did it with both my daughters. I had 2 daughters. The one thing I did with my second daughter, I went into reservoir engineering when I got pregnant with my second daughter, because I was like, it'll just be easier if I'm just working in the office and not going out to the field all the time.
And good for you for doing this. And even back then, you'd probably see less and less women have kids and stay working. I think you mentioned when we were talking that when it was your time to go to labor, you were in a wireline truck, like you were still on location, you had to go give labor. So good for you to showing everybody out there that it didn't matter whether you were there to work, whether or not you were pregnant. And I think something that I can't even believe they would say this back then, but when you left, for your maternity leave, I think it was your boss or someone was like, well, it was nice knowing you, Karen. Have a great life. Like you were not expected to come back to work.
Oh no, he was, and he was a nice boss, nice guy. But one day I was sitting in his office, and he took my hand and he's patting it, going, you don't know it yet, but you're not coming back. And I was like, I didn't get a master's degree in engineering to not work just because I have a baby. We're women, we bear children. That's part of our duties, right?
Yeah.
If you so choose. And I said, I'll be back. Looking back, I wish I took 8 weeks off. And I wish now that I had taken more time off, because it was stressful when you first come back. You still don't feel very well. The baby's waking up in the middle of the night, so you're not getting a good night's sleep, and you're trying to work and add value for the company. When I worked overseas in Norway, the women over there, they get a year maternity leave. And the government,
I believe in Canada too as well.
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would see these women come back after a year, and they'd look fantastic. They're ready to work. The baby is now almost, walking, and toddler and going to Barnahaga or childcare. And the fathers were the ones picking the children up from childcare. So it's more balanced there, childcare between the men and women. As a side note, I think Norwegian women are some of the strongest independent women I've ever met. So you never want to make one of them mad. That's for sure.
So I'm really glad you shared that with us, because there's a lot of women that listen to the podcast. So thank you for sharing your experience in the field. And then also even as a reservoir engineer, having to handle it. So we really appreciate that. You are a part of the SPE, and you've been part of it for a very long time. And you won the International Sustainability Award in 2019, which Massiel mentioned kind of in your intro. And you've been the SPE chair for Hydraulic Conference for over 3 years. Brings you so much passion to be involved, because outside of just your everyday work, we know just from doing the podcast, things we're involved in, it takes a lot of time. So what has driven you to be so passionate in this industry?
Well, like I said, graduate school was pivotal, and that was one of the big speeches that Dr. Lee and Dr. Holditch would tell us as graduate students is it was, our duty to give back to the industry, and that we should be active in the Society of Petroleum Engineers, which is, our nonprofit professional organization. And as a graduate student, you had to write a paper and present it. So, which I did, and I think after you do the first one, it gets easier after that.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, anytime you do something, say you do a project, you should write a paper on it and document it. And I'm actually quite grateful that I've done this. So I've written some papers, maybe around 15, but it's typically where I've worked on a project with a team, and then I'm like, hey, let's write a paper about it, and then document it and get it out to industry. And I'm glad I've done it, because it gives a good resource for all of industry to grow and learn, hopefully faster, if everybody will do that on there. And
Yeah,
I
definitely.
just
Thank you
started
for your
volunteering too. Most of my friends in the industry I've met through SPE.
Mm.
And I hate the fact that we don't have conferences to go to right now, because that's usually where I see
Everybody.
a lot of my friends and colleagues is at these conferences. And then I get to hear what they're working on, and what the latest things they're thinking about. So it helps you keep up. You're not in your own little company internal world, when you stay active in SPE.
So we know you have
But I think
two daughters who are petroleum engineers, correct? Both of them? And they followed your footsteps.
Yeah, I have two daughters. One's a mechanical engineer and one's a petroleum engineer.
Gotcha.
One went to LSU, where I got my undergraduate degree. And that's sort of fun, because I was in Tiger Band when I went to LSU. And then when she went to LSU, she was in Tiger Band.
Oh, cool.
So we can do LSU Tiger Band alumni events together, which is fun. But she's got a mechanical engineering degree, and her fiance, she's getting married in this October. He's a mechanical engineer as well.
Gotcha. So
younger daughter
followed in your footsteps, and really I believe they both worked for Liberty. So they've both kind of followed in that, hydraulic fracturing. They definitely have a mom to look up to. What kind of advice would you give to those maybe younger women who aren't even in petroleum engineering yet, who may be in high school or going through different engineering degrees? What advice do you give to them who maybe don't have a mom to look up to, or have that, inspiration? And what advice would you give them into coming into this male-dominated industry?
Well, all I told my daughters was the same thing my dad told me was, major in something that supports your spending habits, but also find something that you have a passion in. Because if you don't enjoy what you're doing, it's not worth it on there. And luckily, I became passionate. Once I love this industry, because there's so much we don't know, and there's always so much to try to unlock and understand. And it's just like a puzzle. They're always trying to figure out what's going on down hole. And even to this day, there's so much we still on these unconventionals. I thought I knew hydraulic fracturing, and I came from deep water, and we did all these big studies. And then I went back to unconventionals. It was almost full circle. And when I started working in Fayetteville, it was like a whole different world. It was like, what do you mean hydraulic fractures aren't planar? What do you mean they're complex? And so I was like, well, I got to understand this. So it is fun. It can be very fun. It has its negatives to it. The biggest negative to me is the cyclic downturns that we have to go through. I don't know what the answer is to stop it, but that's the worst part of it. And I think even for my daughters right now, they both got laid off from Liberty. I even got laid off from Southwestern. is that you got to deal with these downturns. Well, now I have a new job, and I will say every time I've left a company and started with another company, it's always been a stair step upwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always enjoyed it and learned something new every time. So my oldest daughter, she just got a job back with Liberty.
Oh, that's
She
great.
got a job offer, so she's going back to work. And then my youngest daughter, who is a petroleum engineering degree, it burned her getting laid off. And so she doesn't want to go back, which is sad that we're going to lose, that young, bright mind from our industry. And I'm sure there's thousands like that don't want to come back because of it. The only thing I thought of was maybe restrict enrollment in universities in petroleum engineering, sort of like they do medical school, so that there's only so many coming out, and so that those that do come out get jobs and hopefully keep their jobs. Other than that, I don't know, or maybe a national energy policy, which probably never happened in this country, but that would be nice. So.
No, I mean, you're very correct with that. That is the biggest problem with the industry, which actually segues right into our last question, because you have pushed through many years within a downturn. But last time we talked, you did discuss a few things that you had to go through. So as we were discussing in this industry, there's a lot of ups and downs, and you've experienced many of this, not just in your career, but in your personal life as well, while you've been working in oil and gas. Having children with little time off after giving birth, dealing with a divorce while you were working overseas, and having to walk away from a manager who thought your job could be replaced by a simple procedure. Many people struggle with these same problems, just like you were mentioning, yet you kept pushing on and you overcame every obstacle. Can you talk about what kept you going and how you were able to succeed no matter the situation?
I think the biggest thing that you need to have is perseverance. You just stick with it, and you stay professional, you stick with it. You always try to do what's right. And that's what I did. For example, the manager that, bless her heart. Now I can say anything, right? If you say bless her heart.
Yeah.
She thought that if you could write down your job, just, what your job was, and anybody should be able just to pick that up and do your job. And I was like, there's no way, you can't do that. And but because of that, I got another great job offer, and then that's when I went to work for BP and had some great experiences. I mean, this oil industry, you can work globally if you so choose. So, we lived in Norway for almost 6 years, and we got to see that side of the world and that culture, which is a great culture. I've had great fields to work in the North Sea with Darcy sandstones, wells making 250 million a day, only perforating at 10-meter interval, down to nano Darcy rock, where we have to pump hundreds of millions of pounds just to get it to make 20 or 30 million. And that's what I like, is the challenge on it. And you're always going to meet those people that you may not jive with, you don't agree with, or they, life's not always fair, but you just, if you like it, you just keep at it on it. So it's a great industry, and I really think we need more women. I encourage women. When I headed up recruiting for Southwestern, my boss asked me, she goes, well, how many women versus men should we hire? And I said, no, I think we don't put any quotas. We just hire the brightest. And at that point, we were hiring, interns to be roustabouts, so like little freshmen. And it was great. It came back that we had 6 women and 3 men. And I just sent the recruiters out, and I said, find the brightest, and you can make a job offer yourself for your one intern position from that university. And my boss was like, did you tell them to do that? And I said, no, it's just the way it fell out. So there's a lot of bright women out there, and they're hungry, and they want to work in this industry. I think we need to keep the jobs open for them. It sort of feels like, and I don't have any data to back me up, it seems like during these downturns, we lose more women during these downturns.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know why that is, as if it's just the companies hang on to people that, look like them.
Mm-hmm.
Likes like is one of my sayings. But I think we need to make an effort to try to keep women in this industry because we bring a whole different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Thank you so much. I love everything you said. It was such a good way to even end with that speech. And thank you so much for providing all that free value added that you have given over the last 38 years and for still being here, because it gives us an inspiration, the ones who have been here for a few years, less than 10 years, to keep looking up to someone who has been doing it all. And even though through all the obstacles, you're still up there and you just found another job, and so it's awesome to see. And so thank you so much for sharing your story. This is definitely one in my books for inspiration for sure.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you again for inviting me. So this has been great. And, if anybody, needs any help, I look at a lot of resumes. So if anybody's looking for a job and they need a resume reviewed or just needs to talk or have a cup of coffee, I'm always open for that. So.
Thank you for that, Karen. We'll make sure that we leave your, where they can find you on your LinkedIn and everything in the show notes.
On LinkedIn?
Yes, we'll add that to it. And for those listening, if you like this podcast, please like, subscribe, leave us a comment. We love to hear from you. And thank you again for coming on.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you.